Susan Wheeler ruled our HOA with iron fists and violation notices until she called 911 on my wife for ignoring authority. When 4 police officers arrived and saluted Chief Sarah Martinez instead of arresting her, Susan's 12-year reign of terror ended in the most humiliating way possible. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. Susan Wheeler had ruled Oakwood Heights for 12 years. As HOA president, she controlled every mailbox, every fence and every blade of grass in our pristine suburban neighborhood. Her perfectly manicured lawn, expensive BMW, and clipboard full of violations made her the undisputed queen of our little kingdom. Susan lived for the power. She loved walking the neighborhood with her measuring tape, finding violations that justified $200 fines. She lived for the monthly HOA meetings where she could lecture residents about community standards and property values. But Susan's real passion was newcomers. She saw every new resident as a potential problem that needed to be controlled immediately. That's where my wife, Detective Chief Sarah Martinez, came in. We had just moved to Oakwood Heights after Sarah's promotion to police chief of Millbrook County. After 22 years climbing the ranks from patrol officer to detective to lieutenant to chief, Sarah had earned the respect of every cop in the state. But Susan Wheeler didn't know any of that. All Susan saw was a new neighbor who needed to be put in her place. Sarah and I were still unpacking boxes when Susan appeared at our front door with her clipboard and fake smile. "Hello. I'm Susan Wheeler, your HOA president. Welcome to Oakwood Heights." "Thank you," Sarah said, wiping paint from her hands. "I'm Sarah Martinez and this is my husband Mike." "Wonderful. Now, I need to discuss some important community guidelines with you." Sarah looked confused. "Guidelines?" "Yes, dear. We have very strict standards here. I notice you haven't installed the required brass house numbers yet. That's a $150 fine if not corrected within 48 hours. We just moved in yesterday. Rules are rules, dear. Also, your moving truck blocked Mrs. Patterson's view of the street for 3 hours. That's another violation." I watched Sarah's expression change from confusion to the calm alertness she used when dealing with difficult suspects. "Mrs. Wheeler will take care of the house numbers. But I don't think we should be fined for moving into our own home." Susan's smile turned icy. "You'll learn that we do things properly in this neighborhood, Mrs. Chief Martinez," Sarah corrected quietly. "Well, Mrs. Martinez, I'm sure you'll adjust to our way of life here." Susan walked away without waiting for a response, already writing in her violation book. That was her first mistake. Over the next month, Susan launched a systematic campaign to establish dominance over the new neighbors. She cited us for our grass being 1/4 inch too long. She measured our mailbox post and claimed it was 2 inches outside regulation height. She demanded we remove our welcome mat because it wasn't the approved beige color. Each violation came with a lecture about community standards and a reminder that some people needed to learn how things worked in Oakwood Heights. Sarah handled each interaction with professional calm, but I could see the frustration building. She was working 16-hour days setting up her new department, dealing with budget meetings and personnel issues, and coming home to find violation notices taped to our door. "This woman has serious control issues," Sarah told me one evening, reading Susan's latest complaint about our porch light being too bright. "She's just a small-town tyrant drunk on HOA power," I replied. "She'll get bored and move on to someone else." I was wrong. Susan saw Sarah's calm responses as weakness. She interpreted professional courtesy as submission. She decided that the new neighbor needed a bigger lesson. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah was in our home office, participating in a video conference with the county commissioners about the annual police budget. This wasn't just any meeting, it was the final budget presentation that would determine funding for new officers, equipment and community programs for the entire year. Sarah was dressed in her formal uniform, her chief's badge clearly visible, speaking with commissioners and city officials about public safety priorities. That's when Susan started pounding on our front door. Bang, bang, bang. Sarah muted her microphone and tried to ignore it, hoping Susan would go away. Bang, bang, bang. "Chief Martinez, are you still there?" asked Commissioner Williams on the video call. "Yes, sir. Sorry for the interruption. As I was saying about the community policing initiative." Bang, bang, bang. Susan wasn't stopping. She was now ringing the doorbell repeatedly while continuing to pound on the door. Sarah looked at me with the expression she usually reserved for people who were about to be arrested. "I have to take this call," she whispered. "It's the budget meeting I've been preparing for all month." Bang, bang, bang. Now Susan was also shouting. I know you're in there. You can't ignore HOA business. The commissioners on the video call were looking confused. Chief, do you need to handle something? No sir, just a minor disturbance. Let me continue with the patrol division budget. But Susan was relentless. The pounding and shouting continued for another 10 minutes, disrupting the most important meeting of Sarah's first year as police chief. Finally, Sarah had to end the call early and reschedule, apologizing to commissioners who now questioned whether their new police chief could even control her own neighborhood. When Sarah opened the door, Susan was standing there with her clipboard and a triumphant smile. Finally. I've been trying to get your attention for 20 minutes. Mrs. Wheeler, I was in an important work meeting. Well, HOA business takes priority. I need to discuss your unauthorized window decorations. Sarah looked at our front windows, which had small American flag decals that we'd put up for Memorial Day. Flag decals are prohibited under Section 12B of our covenant. They're considered advertising. They're American flags. Rules are rules, dear. Also, you've been ignoring my previous violations. That shows a pattern of disrespect for community authority. Sarah took a deep breath. Mrs. Wheeler, I've addressed every valid concern you've raised. But disrupting my work meeting was completely inappropriate. Your work meeting? Susan laughed. What kind of work could you possibly do from home? That was her second mistake. That evening, Sarah had to work late at the police station, dealing with the fallout from the disrupted budget meeting. She didn't get home until almost midnight. The next morning, Sarah was scheduled for another video conference, this time with state officials about a federal grant application worth $2.3 million for new police equipment. At exactly 9 a.m., Susan started her assault on our front door again. Bang, bang, bang. Sarah was on screen with officials from the Department of Justice, discussing how the grant money would improve public safety across the entire county. Bang, bang, bang. I'm sorry, Sarah told the federal officials. I have a disturbance at my residence. Could we pause for just a moment? But Susan wasn't pausing. The pounding intensified. Bang, bang, bang. Sarah Martinez. I know you're in there. Stop ignoring me. Sarah muted her microphone and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, she could see Susan with her phone in hand. Mrs. Wheeler, I'm in an important federal meeting. Can this wait? No, it cannot wait. You've been deliberately avoiding HOA business. I'll speak with you this afternoon. You'll speak with me now. Sarah returned to her meeting, but Susan's assault continued. 20 minutes of nonstop pounding, shouting, and doorbell ringing. The federal officials were losing patience. Chief Martinez, perhaps we should reschedule when you have fewer interruptions. Sarah was humiliated. 2 major meetings disrupted by an HOA president who couldn't respect basic boundaries. But Susan wasn't finished. After Sarah ended the federal call, Susan made her own call. She dialed 911. Yes, I need police immediately, Susan announced loudly enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. I have a resident who is refusing to answer her door and comply with legal HOA requirements. Through the door, Sarah could hear every word. She's been deliberately avoiding community obligations and showing disrespect for authority. I think she might be hiding something illegal in her house. Susan was filing a false police report, claiming Sarah was suspicious and potentially criminal, all because Sarah wouldn't drop federal meetings to discuss flag decals. I'm the HOA president, and I have authority to conduct inspections. Her refusal to cooperate suggests criminal activity. That was her third and biggest mistake. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived at our house, lights flashing. 4 officers emerged, unsure what they were responding to but prepared for whatever Susan had described. Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran officer who had worked under Sarah for 8 years, approached our front door. Sarah opened it immediately. Chief. Sergeant Rodriguez looked confused. We got a call about a disturbance at this address. Behind him, Officer Chin and Officer Williams, both officers Sarah had personally recruited and trained, stood looking equally puzzled. Gentlemen, Sarah said with the calm authority that had made her respected throughout the department. What exactly was reported? Ma'am, we got a call about someone refusing to cooperate with HOA authority and possibly hiding illegal activity. All 4 officers suddenly understood what was happening. They looked at Susan, then back at their chief, then at Susan again. Susan was standing on our lawn with her clipboard, looking confident and vindicated. Officers, that woman has been deliberately avoiding her community obligations and refusing to respect authority. Sergeant Rodriguez spoke carefully. Ma'am, Could you describe exactly what illegal activity you believe is occurring? She won't answer her door when I need to conduct HOA business. She's obviously hiding something. Officer Chin stepped forward. Ma'am, are you aware that this is Chief Martinez's residence? Susan's confident expression faltered slightly. Chief of what? Chief of police. She's our boss. The color drained from Susan's face. You just filed a false police report against the chief of police, Sergeant Rodriguez explained, claiming she's engaged in criminal activity. Susan's mouth opened and closed without making sound. Then Officer Williams did something that made my heart swell with pride. He turned to face Sarah, straightened to attention, and gave her a crisp salute. Chief Martinez, we apologize for the false alarm. The other 3 officers immediately followed suit, all saluting their chief in perfect unison. Thank you, officers, Sarah replied with the dignity that had earned their respect. I believe we have a situation that needs to be documented. What Susan didn't realize was that filing a false police report is a serious crime. Claiming someone is engaged in criminal activity when you know they're not is a felony. But Sarah wasn't just dealing with a false report, she was dealing with harassment that had disrupted official police business and interfered with federal grant applications. Sergeant Rodriguez, I need this incident fully documented. Mrs. Wheeler has been harassing my family for weeks, and today she filed a false report claiming I'm engaged in criminal activity. Yes, ma'am. Should we arrest her now? Sarah shook her head. Let's do this properly. Full investigation, complete documentation, proper charges. She wasn't acting as an angry neighbor anymore. She was acting as the chief of police, and Susan had just committed crimes against a law enforcement officer. Mrs. Wheeler, Sarah said, turning to Susan with official authority, you're being investigated for filing a false police report, harassment of a law enforcement officer, and interference with official police business. Susan found her voice. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. Ma'am, being HOA president doesn't give you the right to file false police reports. But you were ignoring me. I was conducting official police business with federal and county officials. You disrupted government meetings and then filed false criminal allegations. Susan looked around desperately for support, but the gathering crowd of neighbors was watching in stunned silence. This is abuse of power. Susan finally said. You're using your position to avoid HOA responsibilities. Officer Chin spoke up. Ma'am, the chief was conducting budget meetings for our department. You interrupted official police business. And then filed a false report claiming she was criminal, added Officer Williams. Susan was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. News of an HOA president filing false police reports against the police chief spread quickly through our small town. The local newspaper picked up the story first. HOA president arrested for false report against police chief. Then regional media got involved. Power-mad HOA leader files false criminal report. By evening, the story had reached social media, where it exploded across the internet. Hashtag HOA Karen and hashtag police chief started trending. Videos of the 4 officers saluting Sarah went viral. Comments poured in from thousands of people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Susan became the face of HOA abuse nationwide. News crews arrived at Oakwood Heights, interviewing neighbors about Susan's years of harassment and overreach. She fined me $300 because my rose bushes were too tall, Mrs. Patterson told Channel 7 News. I never knew I could complain to anyone. She made my kids stop playing sidewalk chalk because it lowered property values, said Mr. Johnson. We felt like prisoners in our own home. Susan Wheeler has terrorized this neighborhood for years, explained Mrs. Chin. Nobody dared to stand up to her. Story after story emerged of Susan's tyrannical rule and petty harassment. But the most damaging coverage focused on her disruption of official police business. This woman's personal vendetta interfered with federal grant applications and county budget meetings, reported the state news. Her actions potentially cost taxpayers millions in lost funding. Susan tried to defend herself in a disastrous interview with the local paper. I was just trying to maintain community standards, she said. How was I supposed to know she was important? That quote, how was I supposed to know she was important? Became the most mocked phrase on social media. Susan was formally charged with filing a false police report, felony, harassment of a law enforcement officer, felony, interference with official government business, misdemeanor, abuse of emergency services, misdemeanor. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that Susan's actions were just overzealous community management. But Sarah's case was bulletproof. She had video recordings of the disrupted federal meetings. She had documentation of weeks of harassment. She had witness statements from neighbors. She had the 911 recording where Susan deliberately lied about criminal activity. Most damaging was Susan's own HOA correspondence, where she had written about teaching the new neighbors who's really in charge, and showing them that community authority comes first. The prosecutor, District Attorney Maria Santos, took the case personally. "This isn't about HOA disputes," DA Santos told reporters. "This is about a citizen who deliberately lied to emergency services and interfered with official police operations." Susan's trial became a media circus. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and law enforcement officers showing support for their chief. The criminal charges against Susan gave Oakwood Heights residents something they'd never had before: hope that their tormentor could be stopped. A group of neighbors organized to recall Susan from her HOA position. They collected signatures, documented years of harassment, and demanded new leadership. "Susan Wheeler has abused her authority for 12 years, said petition organizer Mrs. Patterson. "She turned our neighborhood into a police state where children were afraid to play outside." The recall effort revealed the true extent of Susan's tyranny. Over $50,000 in fines collected for trivial violations. 37 families who had considered moving because of harassment. 6 families who had actually moved to escape Susan's control. Multiple cases of elderly residents being bullied over minor infractions. Property values had actually declined because potential buyers learned about Susan's reputation. Real estate agents warned clients about the HOA situation in Oakwood Heights. The recall election was scheduled for the same week as Susan's criminal trial. Susan's trial was a disaster for her defense. Sarah testified with the same calm professionalism she brought to every case. She described the systematic harassment, the disrupted federal meetings, and the false criminal allegations. "Mrs. Wheeler's actions didn't just affect my family," Sarah explained. "She interfered with federal grant applications worth $2.3 million for public safety equipment. She disrupted county budget meetings that fund essential services." The prosecutor played the 911 recording where Susan deliberately claimed Sarah was hiding illegal activity. Then came the parade of neighbors testifying about years of harassment and abuse. Mrs. Patterson described being fined for having flowers that were too colorful. Mr. Johnson explained how Susan had made his children afraid to play in their own yard. Mrs. Chim told the court about Susan's threats to foreclose on homes over minor violations. Susan's defense attorney tried to portray her as a dedicated volunteer protecting property values. But then the prosecutor revealed Susan's financial records. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Wheeler collected over $50,000 in fines during her 12 years as HOA president. She paid herself a $1,200 monthly administrative fee from this money." Susan had been profiting from her harassment of neighbors. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Susan was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 2 years probation, and 300 hours of community service. She was also ordered to pay restitution to all families who had been inappropriately fined. But the real victory came in the recall election. Susan was removed from the HOA board by a vote of 127 to 3. Only her sister and 2 friends voted to keep her. The new HOA board, led by President Mrs. Patterson, immediately began reforms. All fines from the previous 5 years were reviewed and refunded where inappropriate. New rules required board approval for any fines over $50. Harassment policies were established to protect residents. Monthly fees were reduced by eliminating Susan's administrative salary. Property values in Oakwood Heights increased by 15% within 6 months as word spread about the neighborhood's transformation. With Susan's disruptions ended, Sarah was able to focus on her actual job as police chief. She rescheduled the federal grant meeting and successfully secured the $2.3 million in funding for new police equipment, training programs, and community safety initiatives. The county budget was approved with full funding for additional officers and expanded services. Sarah's department became a model for other counties, implementing innovative community policing programs and achieving the lowest crime rates in the state. Her leadership style, calm, professional, and focused on results rather than ego, earned respect from officers, officials, and citizens throughout the region. The same qualities that Susan had mistaken for weakness turned out to be exactly what made Sarah an exceptional police chief. Susan served her 6 months and moved away immediately after her release. She relocated to a different state where nobody knew her history. Her house in Oakwood Heights sat empty for months before finally selling at a significant loss. The viral videos of her arrest and trial followed her everywhere, making it impossible to rebuild her reputation. The Oakwood Heights neighborhood became everything Susan had prevented it from being, a real community where families felt safe and welcome. Children played in yards without fear of violation notices. Neighbors helped each other with projects instead of reporting minor infractions. The community garden that Mrs. Chen had always wanted was built in the common area. Under new leadership, the HOA focused on actual community needs, maintaining common areas, organizing social events, and protecting property values through cooperation rather than intimidation. People often ask Sarah if she's proud of destroying Susan's life and career. "I didn't destroy Susan Wheeler," Sarah always replies. "She destroyed herself by breaking the law and abusing her authority." The badge that Susan never bothered to notice when it was right in front of her wasn't just a symbol of authority, it represented years of training, dedication, and service to the community. Susan saw Sarah as just another neighbor to be controlled and bullied. She never asked what Sarah did for work, never showed interest in getting to know her new neighbors, and never considered that her behavior might have consequences. When someone files false police reports and interferes with federal government business, they're not just harassing one person, they're attacking the entire system of law and order. Sarah's response wasn't revenge, it was justice. The contrast between Susan's failed leadership and Sarah's successful leadership became a case study in management schools and law enforcement academiums. Susan led through fear, intimidation, and arbitrary rule enforcement. She demanded respect without earning it and used her authority to benefit herself rather than serve others. Sarah led through competence, fairness, and consistent application of actual laws. She earned respect through professional excellence and used her authority to protect and serve the entire community. Susan's neighborhood lived in fear of violation notices and fines. Sarah's police department had the highest morale and lowest turnover in the state. Susan collected money from neighbors she was supposed to serve. Sarah secured millions in federal funding for public safety improvements. The difference wasn't just in their positions, it was in their understanding of what authority means and how it should be used. 5 years have passed since Susan Wheeler called 911 on the police chief. Oakwood Heights is unrecognizable, in the best possible way. The neighborhood has become a model community where families want to live, children play safely, and neighbors support each other. Crime is virtually non-existent, partly because everyone knows the police chief lives there, but mostly because it's become the kind of place where people look out for each other. Sarah was re-elected as police chief unanimously by the county commission. Her department's success has made her a sought-after speaker at law enforcement conferences across the country. The HOA operates transparently and efficiently under leadership that actually serves the community rather than ruling it. Property values have increased significantly, not because of strict enforcement of arbitrary rules, but because Oakwood Heights has become known as a great place to live. Susan Wheeler is a cautionary tale told in HOA reform seminars and law enforcement training programs. Her story illustrates what happens when small authority becomes corrupted by ego and greed. But the real lesson isn't about Susan's downfall, it's about what happened afterward. When bad leadership was removed, good leadership emerged. When fear was eliminated, community flourished. When arbitrary rules were replaced with reasonable policies, everyone benefited. The badge that Susan never saw coming didn't just represent law enforcement authority, it represented the difference between leadership that serves others and authority that serves only itself. Susan called the cops on a cop and learned that some people earn their authority through service, sacrifice, and competence rather than clipboard-wielding intimidation. Sometimes the badge wins. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes the bullies face consequences. And sometimes, the best revenge is just being better at your job than they ever were at theirs. The morning Sarah pins her chief's badge to her uniform and heads to work, she carries with her the knowledge that true authority comes from serving others, not from demanding their submission. That's a lesson Susan Wheeler learned too late in handcuffs, while being saluted by officers who knew the difference between real leadership and HOA tyranny. The badge always wins when it's worn by someone who understands what it really means.